All right, on to passage 5 of the ACT English Practice Test 3. Let's get to it. It says modern uses for old ways, and what this passage is about agriculture and farming, and about how Iroquois farming techniques are actually being used to help more modern farming techniques that have actually had negative consequences for soil and overall farming production. So let's see what this is about. Let's see what the questions are. 61 says the ground being bumpy with mounds and covered with old leaves. Okay, I said this multiple times before, and it's something that keeps showing up on these tests, so you always got to be watching out for it. Whenever you have this word being or the word having, you got to be very skeptical, be very suspicious, because there's usually something wrong with it. Either it's going to pretend to be its own verb, because being is not a verb, right? Being is a verb form. You could say is being, but even if you just say is being, that's sort of a wordy way of putting it. Why can't you just say is, right? And so you should be watching out for that in general. And in this case, A would be wrong, because being here is pretending to be a verb. You need a verb following this subject, the ground, something bumpy with mounds and covered with leaves. Well, the ground, what bumpy with mounds? Being bumpy doesn't work, but what you could say is the ground is bumpy with mounds and is covered with leaves, because that verb works with that adjective. Okay? So that would work, that would complete the sentence, that would make it an independent clause. So let's say, what about was bumpy with mounds and is? Well, that doesn't make sense, because this is talking about her garden plots as a present tense situation, right? So why would it make sense to have past tense here and then present tense? Was it like this before? Was it bumpy with mounds before and is this now? Well, that's very unclear. So B would be wrong. What about C? Is bumpy with mounds and covered with old leaves. That makes sense. And then you have D, bumpy with mounds and. Does that make sense? Just eliminate any sign of any kind of verb? Well, no, D wouldn't be correct either. So the only choice that makes any kind of sense is C. 62. All right, it says, beans hang on the corn stalks and squash vines had sprawled everywhere. Well, again, you want to keep the same tense, because all of this is just description for her garden plots, right? How her garden plots look a total mess. Well, you have a continuation of that present tense, and so what would you expect? Because she's just, the narrator is just describing, or the author is just describing what is visible in the garden plots. Beans hang on the corn stalks, and squash vines had sprawled. No, what would be consistent would be sprawl. Not past perfect tense, but present tense sprawl. And squash vines sprawl everywhere. So F wouldn't work, but you see G says sprawl. H wouldn't work because that's past tense again. And then J is the auxiliary sense, is could have sprawled, as in, like, here's this hypothetical situation. That doesn't work either. So the only tense that works is G. What about 63? All right, 63, but this apparent chaos is a subject of scientific research. Is there anything wrong here? It doesn't seem like it. You have the subject here, chaos, and the verb is. Chaos is a subject of scientific research. No problem. What about B? Chaos, comma, is a subject. Well, this is a situation where they're putting an unnecessary comma after the subject. You don't need to have a comma after the subject and before the verb. Again, that's like saying, the cat jumped on the fence. Do you say the cat, comma, jumped on the fence? No, you just say the cat jumped on the fence. You just say the subject, verb, no comma in between. B adds that unnecessary comma. C has this comma after subject. You don't put commas between the nouns and then the prepositions, prepositional phrases that modify them. What kind of subject? It's a subject of scientific research. No comma between the preposition and noun that it goes with. So C is wrong for that comma. What about D? Unnecessary colon, okay? Unnecessary. Because you really just have a subject-verb situation here. A colon, again, a colon, whatever comes after the colon, describes what comes before the colon, or gives a list of. But what describes is more about the subject. It's not is the subject, is that sort of describes chaos more. It's more straight up the subject of scientific research. And that wouldn't really even be needed at all, or wouldn't even make sense at all to have, because this is just the predicate nominative, meaning it's whatever comes after the verb. You have the chaos is, or this apparent chaos is. Well, this apparent chaos is what? Just say it. There's no need for a colon, okay? So D is also wrong. So the only answer choice that makes sense is A, no change. What about 64? All right. Pleasance Gardens are modeled for those grown by the Iroquois and other native peoples. All right. This is an issue where you have to choose the correct preposition. Well, let's figure this out. Pleasance Gardens are modeled for. Is it for anybody? Are these for anybody? No, these are probably modeled on these people, okay? They're modeled on those gardens, meaning this woman's gardens are based on how these really great Iroquois gardens were designed. So on would work because that preposition indicates her gardens are based on something else. What about as? Well, no, as doesn't really imply that it's based on something else, okay? It just says, well, they're like this. What about by? Well, by wouldn't work either. If you have Pleasance Gardens are modeled by those grown by. Well, if you model it by something, then something has to be modeling it, right? Like a person. But those grown are what? Gardens, right? So can gardens model things? No. People can use gardens as models, right? But gardens themselves can't model things, and so by wouldn't work. You could say they would be modeled by Iroquois and Native peoples, but because of the way the sentence is structured, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't be an option. So the only one answer that makes sense is on. It's the only one that indicates it's based on something else. Okay? 65. For the sake of the logic and coherence of this paragraph, sentence 6 should be placed. All right, let's look at this. The data the gardens are yielding may provide evidence to support the use of old methods to improve modern agriculture. So it's talking about data and I guess evidence, all right, to support something, right? So I guess they're doing some kind of experiment. Well, let's go back and read this. Because the answer choices says what? Put it after sentence 1, after sentence 2, or after sentence 3. At first glance, Jane Mount Pleasant's garden plots look a total mess. Does it make sense to talk about the data here? Well, no, there's no indication there's any kind of experiment being done. The ground being bumpy with mounds covered with old leaves, and then you have beans hanging on the corn stalks and squash vines that sprawled everywhere. All of this is just description of the garden. They're all basically the same. You can change around any of these sentences and they're all the same, meaning there's no indication where it would make sense to put anything about data and evidence. But if you look at sentence 4, it says, but this apparent chaos is the subject of scientific research. Wow, okay. So that data sentence probably really should come after sentence 4. Because sentence 5 is Pleasance Gardens are modeled for those grown by, it kind of describes what the subject is, okay? And then 6 says the data the gardens are yielding. Now it makes sense. So it certainly doesn't make sense to have that sentence about data and evidence, that last sentence, after sentences 1, 2, and 3, because those are just general descriptions about the garden. It's like, the garden looks like this, it's just a mess. So the answer choice has to be A, where it is now. All right, on to question 66. It says, at this point, the writer wants to add a statement that would lead into the sentence that follows it. Given that all of the choices are true, which one would best accomplish that purpose? Okay, let's read the sentence. A Cornell University agronomist and an Iroquois herself, Jane Mount Pleasant questions some of modern agriculture's practices, and she has a PhD. Whoa. Many farmers and agronomists believe that the recent boom in crop production in the last few years, fueled by the intensive blah, 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 have come with hidden costs. Okay. Well, first of all, it says she questions some of modern agriculture's practices, and then it says, and she has a PhD. So this just sounds sort of out of place, because it's talking about what? For the first, this modifier gives her background. So this would be a more appropriate here, right? You could say a PhD Cornell agronomist, as opposed to sort of adding it at the end as a sort of separate independent clause, because the main part is this statement. All right? Well, then it talks about how many farmers and agronomists believe that the recent boom has come with hidden costs. So if she's saying modern agricultural practices have problems, she questions some of it, and then many farmers and agronomists agree that there are hidden costs, well, there's probably some kind of agreement, and this is sort of out of place. It just sort of interrupts everything that's going on. So would this fit? Would that sentence, and she has a PhD degree, really fit? No, it wouldn't really fit. What about G? Her concern is shared by others. Oh, that's perfect. Her concern, her questioning modern agricultural practices is shared by others, many farmers and agronomists. So, G seems to work. What about H? She's enjoyed gardening since she was a child. That has nothing to do with what's going on. How she questions agriculture's practices, and then how farmers and agronomists, agree with her basically. And then her opinions are based on scientific research. That's almost like saying she's a PhD, so she has to be really smart about it. I mean, whether or not her opinions are based on scientific research, it doesn't have to do with the fact that other people agree with her, okay? Even if her opinions weren't based on scientific research, other people would still agree, right? So J would not work either. The only one that most directly connects both sentences is G. Her concern is shared by others. 67. All right. Many farmers and agronomists believe that the recent boom in crop production in the last few years, fueled by, all right, what you need to keep in mind or need to watch out for, it says in the last few years, but it also says recent. Well, what's recent mean? In the last few years could be a gauge of recent on a longer term time frame. So this is an issue of redundancy. Production of lately, production lately, same thing. It's very similar to recent. Which one eliminates all the redundancy? Production. And these redundancy problems, if you can spot them easily, they're like the best questions because they're so fast, they're so quick to do. 68. It says, fueled by intensive use of farmland, increased dependence on herbicides and pesticides have come with hidden costs. All right. This is, again, something that they'll often do. They'll have the subject here and the verb here, and then put in a huge space between them. So it becomes, I guess, less easy to easily identify what the subject and verb are, so you can spot out subject-verb disagreements. Well, what's the subject here? Because what's come with recent costs? You have to understand that, first of all, while the main subject and verb of the whole sentence is subject, farmers, and agronomists, that's a compound subject, multi-subject, multi-noun subject. The verb is believe, but you have a relative clause here, based on this relative pronoun, that the recent boom in crop production in the last few years, and then they have this dash. Dashes are kind of like either interrupting modifiers. You can basically just treat it almost like in math, like parentheses. Treat it like parentheses, as in it doesn't need to be there. It's just sort of description that you can read, but it doesn't affect the other parts of the sentence grammatically. So after this relative clause, you have a new subject and new verb within this. So the recent boom in crop production can't be the noun because in is a prepositional phrase. Crop production comes right after, so in crop production is a prepositional phrase, not the subject, okay? Whatever's part of the prepositional phrase is not the subject ever. It's just description. So the subject of this clause within the whole sentence is boom. Well, the boom, here's the verb that within that clause, have come. Boom is singular, have come is plural. So that doesn't make sense, right? It should be boom has come with hidden costs. Just to have the right plural singular agreement. In this case, singular, singular. So what about G? Has. All right, sure. What about R? No, that doesn't make sense because boom is singular, R is plural. And what about omit? Can you just say the recent boom come with hidden costs? You could say comes with hidden costs or has come with hidden costs, but just come by itself would make the verb plural. That disagrees with the singular subject. So omitting the underlined portion wouldn't work. The only answer choice that works is G, has. 69, whoa, which of the following sentences, if added at this point, would both reinforce the conclusions presented in the essay and create an effective transition to the next paragraph? All right, so 69, let's have come with hidden costs. Soil erosion and pollution have put our food supply and health at risk. Oh no! Okay, so modern agriculture, problems. What's the next sentence? The Iroquois method begins with corn being planted at 3-foot intervals. So we have this last paragraph saying, oh no, modern agriculture, problems with our food and crop production. And then the Iroquois method says, oh well, the Iroquois method does it this way, different than the so-called modern way. What would be the good transition? Iroquois farming techniques, however, offer possible solutions to such problems. That would make sense. The problems were what? The problems were, modern agriculture and the things that it does. Iroquois farming, though, possibly has a solution. And then it describes Iroquois farming. So A could work. What about B? Many diseases have a direct link to these toxins in our air, land, and water. Well, what does that have to do with the next paragraph? Does that transition to Iroquois stuff? No. What about C? Certain farming practices have been employed by the Iroquois people. Sure, that has to do with the next paragraph, but does that have to do with the problems associated with modern farming? No. This one does address the problems aspect and the Iroquois farming. Both. What about D? These social problems must be resolved one way or another. It's not specifically talking about the Iroquois as having solutions for that. So D would be too unspecific. A works best as a result. So A is the answer. 70. The Iroquois method begins with corn being planted at 3-foot intervals. Later, soil had been mounded around the young stalks, enhancing drainage and warming, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what this is talking about is how to do the Iroquois method of farming. And when you talk about a general practice, you would do it this way, you do it that way. When you describe the process, you use present tense because it's used in an ongoing basis, right? When you talk about baking a cake and you give instructions, you don't say you baked this and then you put this and then he put this flour before blah blah blah. No, everything is in present tense. Like once you do this, make sure you do that. Then put this here. Then do that. Then put it in the oven. Turn the oven on this. Okay. And in this case, you have that same situation. Begins, present tense. And then what should be here, had mounded around, it also should be a continuation of that present tense because it really is giving instructions about how this process works. All right, this didn't just happen before and doesn't happen now. It still works today. So this needs to be in present tense. Has been. Well, has been is not present tense, it's present perfect, meaning it somehow started in the past and continues to now. Well, no, maybe this process was done in the past, but it's not like it's something that just has started at an arbitrary time. It's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing way of farming that's been used historically, that's used now, it can be used in general. Okay? Was present is past tense, that doesn't work. What about is? Well, is obviously the clearest, very clear present tense that fits in with begins. Okay, on to 71. It says, which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? So which one is completely wrong? So it says, later, soil had been mounded around the young stalks, enhancing drainage and warming. Well, what this is saying is that because the soil is mounded around the young stalks, I guess the soil is put around the young stalks. I guess the new young stalks meaning new plants, soil is put around it. It improves drainage and warming the soil, okay? It improves that, right? And I guess that makes sense. You put soil around plants, and I don't know how I don't really know how drainage is enhanced, but I would guess it warms the soil because if soil is all put together around the plant, maybe it's a little warmer. I'm not a farmer, but I guess that's what I can gather. Well, what about A? A, stalks, because would you say soil is mounded around the young stalks because of enhancing drainage and warming? Well, A, right off the bat, this is a question where you have to think about it. This wouldn't work logically because this is saying soil is put around the stalks because of drainage and warm soil, okay? So while the sentence as is says that you put soil to do the drainage and to warm, this is saying the warming and the drainage put the soil around the stalks because of enhancing drainage and warming. Do you guys see that? The relationship is flipped, so the logic doesn't work. So A is wrong for that reason. What about B? Stalks, in order to enhance drainage and warm the soil. That makes sense. What about C? Stalks, which enhances drainage and warms the soil. Sure, putting it, the soil around the stalks does that stuff. Logical relationship intact. And then stalks, period. This enhances drainage and warms. Sure, everything is fine. The only one that changes the logical relationship and turns it opposite is A. So A is wrong. It's least acceptable, not acceptable. So that's the correct answer. 72. Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? Oh, another not acceptable one. All right. it says beans are then planted on the mounds and squash is planted between the mounds. All right, is there anything wrong with this? Beans are then planted on the mounds, comma, and new subject, new verb, separated by a comma and the word and. That's perfectly fine. What about F, mounds, while squash? That's fine. You could have a new independent clause. While can serve as a conjunction with a comma. Okay? So you have a subject verb, then new subject, new verb. That's fine. What about G with a period? That's the same thing as this, except you cross that, you just cross that out and you put in a period. Yeah. Can you do that? Beans are then planted on the mounds, period, squash is planted between the mounds. Sure, you can say that. That's perfectly fine. What about H? Mounds, semicolon. Yep, that's pretty much the same as the period, because a semicolon has to separate two independent clauses, meaning two clauses that have each their own subject and their own verbs, and they have to be related ideas. And are they related? Yes, they're related. They're both talking about plants and the growing stuff, and there's really nothing different between these two except that punctuation. So H is perfectly fine. What about J? Mounds, squash. Oh, well, I think that's a problem. Beans are then planted on the mounds. Squash is then planted between the mounds. The problem here is that you have a subject, verb, and then a new subject, new verb. All right, new subject, new verb. What's the problem with that? Run-on sentence. You need to grammatically separate them for that clause to work as one sentence. And in this case, there's no separation, or you need to separate them into two separate sentences. And in this case, grammatically, they're just smushed together. It is a run-on sentence. J is not acceptable. 73, given that all of the choices are true, which one would provide information that is most relevant and meaningful to the essay as a whole? Okay, corns, beans, and squash. Remember the dashes, they're kind of just like parentheses or interrupting descriptive clauses. Corn, beans, and squash. All of which might be grown in your garden, work as a team. And then the whole paragraph talks about, I guess, how these things work together. And then it talks a bit more about Mount Pleasant and then her experiences. Well, all of which might be grown in your garden. Sure, okay, that's it's not like necessarily the most random thing, but is it really relevant to the passage, to this paragraph, or even this passage? Is this talking about, oh, you could do this at your house? No, this isn't about that. This is talking about 3 specific types of crops that used together are, I guess, help each other's growing capacity, or helps the farming ability in some way. And these are related to what? This is related to the Iroquois method of farming. So this is sort of irrelevant to what's going on. It's just sort of a non sequitur, meaning a random insertion of information. It's like, oh yeah, corns, beans, and squash, dash, oh, by the way, I really like their flavor, dash, work as a team. So A would not work. What about B? Which could make a nice vegetarian dish? Oh, that's about just as random as saying, they taste so good, something like that. Or C, the Iroquois 3 sisters. Yeah, that's perfectly relevant to what's going on. It's talking about the Iroquois call them the 3 sisters in farming, and it's about the Iroquois farming technique. Sure, that's completely relevant. And then you have representing various food families. Yeah, this is just general detail that's not specific to this paragraph, or even to the last paragraph, or really this passage as a whole. So the only answer choice that works is C. 74 says, perhaps the best endorsement of the Iroquois 3 sisters system is that it has worked for over 4 centuries. Okay. You have the subject what? The best endorsement of the Iroquois Three Sisters system is a prepositional phrase. Of the Iroquois system, of is a preposition. What comes after is part of the prepositional phrase. Endorsement is the subject. What's the verb? Is. And then what comes after? All the rest of the sentence, called a predicate nominative. That's all that stuff, all the rest of the junk. Okay. Do you need any kind of comma between is and the rest? No, you don't. You don't need anything. So H is wrong. Again, just going back to another example like that, do you say, if I'm talking about a rabbit, do I say the rabbit is, comma, white? Or do I just say the rabbit is white? Well, I just say the rabbit is white. And in a very similar way, if you have that system is blank, you just don't need that at all. Should you have a comma between the subject and the verb? No, you shouldn't. And does it make sense to have a colon here? No, it doesn't. Because the system is, you're about to say exactly what's going on, the predicate nominative. There's no reason to have that additional form of punctuation. You just say it, okay? So F is the correct answer. F just says system is that, it just goes on, okay? There's no unnecessary punctuation, no unnecessary comma. All right, last one, 75. It says, suppose the writer had chosen to write a brief essay about an example of how the past can inform the present. Will this essay successfully fulfill the writer's goal? Well, it seems so. Why? Because what's the essay about? How Iroquois farming can help improve modern farming practices that in some ways can be harmful. So if we look at A, it says yes, because the essay compares the traditional techniques of Three Sisters farming to the high-tech methods of modern farming. That seems to be true. You have to be careful, because what does the question say? Inform, okay? And what is this? It's just compare. Like, I can compare the Iroquois Three Sisters farming to, I guess, modern farming, but that doesn't mean the old method is informing or helping in any way the modern farming techniques. What about B? Yes, because the essay describes how the traditional farming practices of the Iroquois people can offer ways to improve modern agriculture, i.e. inform the present. Sure, that seems to be a perfect answer. What about C? No, because the essay presents the theories of Jane Mount Pleasant, who is currently an agronomist at Cornell University and therefore not a reflection of the past. This essay isn't really about Jane Mount Pleasant, it's about what she's found. She's one person among many who agree that modern farming practices have problems, and her studies have shown that the Iroquois method is helping, can help modern farming techniques. So, yeah, it's not just Jane's theories, but Jane has a role in this. And so, but a lot of her theories are based, or ideas are based on the past, Iroquois farming methods. So C is wrong. What about D? No, because the essay describes the planting of cover crops, which has always been a common practice among farmers. Okay, just because it talks about cover crops, it has nothing to do about the way cover crops are farmed. Cover crops, I guess, would be things like beans and corn and squash. It's corn, yeah, that stuff is grown, throughout time, but the way it's farmed is what this essay, what this passage is about, and that's what the focus needs to be on. And certainly, the farming methods of the Iroquois is the focus of the essay in terms of its ability to help modern farming practices, okay? So B is the answer choice that seems to make the most sense, and that is the right answer choice. So anyway, good job finishing practice test 3. Just 2 more practice tests left, so whenever you're ready, we'll start with passage 1 of practice test 4.